All right. Daily Wire reports Bill Maher, the host of HBO's Real Time, said during an interview last week that Democrats need to drop their support for the transgender movement if they want to start winning again. Maher made the remarks on the leftist podcast Pod Save America with the former Obama speechwriter John Lovett. We have some of that conversation, so here's a clip of it.
Do I think in most of America they did that in schools? I don't. But I think in enough of them, in enough far left places, they did constantly have this idea in the minds of children that maybe you're not in the right body. I mean, the New England Journal of Medicine advocated for taking sex off of a birth certificate, I believe. It was like you're assigned sex
assigned sex at birth.
Yeah. You're assigned.
I think that's right.
I was assigned it by my when I was born. Yes, and again, to tell kids it doesn't always have to be and isn't always the default setting, but that's a different mentality than they put in the minds of kids. And that's why this debate goes on. And the fact that you think, or a lot of people on the left think that even if you just have this debate, it makes you a bigot, you just have to roll over. That was, you asked about the Biden administration. That was their position.
For a long time, people said, older gay people are recruiting kids to be gay. And they wouldn't really be gay. It was they were being recruited, they were being groomed, that they were being drawn. That was their conservative position. The Christian right position for a long time was the reason you didn't want to have gay teachers is they're going to recruit. That the gay lifestyle is going to look so enticing and so exciting that it's going to bring these poor defenseless boys, they mostly boys, into the gay lifestyle and destroy their lives. But of course, that wasn't true. Really, all gay teachers were an example.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Look, there are a few examples of people getting older and realizing that they shouldn't have transitioned. That happens. It's real. That's real.
Yeah, more than a few.
But there are also really important surgeries that people get for their heart, and they go wrong and somebody dies. And nobody says we must stop the cardiologist. And what you say is, let's make sure that this version of it is being practiced well. We don't get rid of the specific surgery. We don't throw out a whole field of medicine. We say, let's make sure we're doing it in a way that's healthy. And that gender-affirming care saves a lot of lives. And the truth is, we talk about these edge cases, talk about athletes, talk about locker rooms, but for the most part, what we're talking about is a very small group of people that just want the opportunity to live and express themselves.
Okay, so a bunch of things to go over here. First of all, Bill Maher, as usual, is defending basically the weakest version of the right side of this argument. The fact that me and Bill Maher are ostensibly on the same side of the trans debate is just a reflection of how insane the left has gotten, of course. Because in actuality, Maher still has a leftist view of the trans issue. You know, that's the crazy thing, is that he's seen as this kind of voice of reason on the trans stuff, and he is, in comparison to like the guy that he was just talking to, he is, but he still has a liberal view of the issue, which, by the way, I don't think he would object to that characterization. He doesn't object. He doesn't object to. He is a liberal. I don't think he would deny that. So now he objects for the most part to castrating kids, which is good that he objects to that, but he doesn't really deny the validity of transgenderism in principle, right? That's the point. Because that is, if there's a quote unquote conservative position on this, it's not just that, we shouldn't be harming kids. It's that transgenderism itself is a category error. It's the category itself is made up. That's the conservative position. That's not Bill Maher's position. In fact, I believe he said recently in the last couple of weeks that the right goes too far when they say that sex is only male and female. He kind of alluded to it there, where he said that, his position is basically like most of the time you can tell if a baby is male or female from birth, but that's not always the case. It's not always the default setting. So he thinks there are exceptions, which means that Maher's position on transgenderism is the left-wing position of 15 or 20 years ago. The difference is that he did not keep sliding insanely to the left. He just stayed in his spot while the rest of the left drifted, that way. And that's what makes Maher the reasonable one in all these conversations. It's not that he's conservative at all. It's that he's the exact same liberal that he was 15 years ago. He has the exact same liberal positions that he did 15 years ago. His progressivism did not progress. It didn't go into remission either. It just kind of stayed in one spot. And that's important to emphasize because whenever you see Maher debating transgenderism with a leftist, you have to remember that the position he's defending is actually a very liberal position. But it's still too much. It's too conservative. It's too sane for the more left-wing person he's arguing with. That's always the dynamic in these conversations we've seen, and that's the dynamic here. And then we hear from the other guy, John Lovett, and his answer, as expected, is a total mess. First of all, he says, hey, remember when conservatives claimed that LGBT activists were recruiting kids? That was crazy. That turned out to be false, right? So clearly what they're saying now about the trans stuff is also false. And his point is that conservatives were obviously wrong about LGBT activists recruiting kids, which means that they're also wrong about the trans stuff, except that we weren't wrong about kids being recruited. That's exactly what happened. Yeah, you're right. We did claim that, and we have been proven correct. That's why you see an explosion in LGBT identification over the past 10 years. The last number I saw, this was in a poll, a Gallup poll in April or March or April of 2024, I think. Maybe there's been a more recent one. But the number was about 20% of Gen Z identifies as LGBT. And you hear these kind of numbers, maybe you hear them so much you get numb to them. But really think about that. 20% of the entire generation identifies as LGBT. That is double the LGBT identification rate among millennials, and like 20 times the number of among boomers, which would be their grandparents. So how did that happen? How does that happen? Well, it happens because there was a concerted effort to use the public school system and the media and Hollywood and so on and social media to indoctrinate children into this lifestyle. Again, think about this in the terms of theories. Okay, a good theory should have predictive power. If a theory is true, then I should be able to, based on this theory, predict what will happen in the future if my theory is true. So take the idea that children are being indoctrinated into the LGBT lifestyle, that there's an actual recruitment effort underway to indoctrinate and brainwash kids into this. Somebody like myself, who has made this claim for years, is putting forward a theory. And that theory predicts, if it's true, it predicts that we should see a massive, disproportionate jump in LGBT identification in the generation that is being indoctrinated. So if we're going around claiming that, hey, they're indoctrinating kids into the LGBT lifestyle, and then you look at the numbers and you see, but kids, this youngest generation, they identify as LGBT at about the same rate as, the last 10 generations before them. And if that was the case, then that would be a fact that really disproves the theory that kids are being indoctrinated. Then there's no evidence of it. Except that we do see this massive jump. The thing that our theory predicts came true, which is very good evidence that the theory itself is true. So John's argument, if you can call it that, falls apart already. And then he starts droning on about studies. He says that gender-affirming care, quote unquote, saves lives and studies prove it. Again, simply false. We've gone over these studies many times, and all of the studies, and I mean all of them, literally all of them, that allegedly prove the efficacy of quote unquote gender-affirming care, all of these studies are bunk. The methodology is insane in all of them. Often these are studies funded by people who have a vested financial interest in a certain outcome. And the studies are, as I always point out, are impossible anyway. I mean, it's actually impossible to have, even at this point, it is impossible to have a reliable study that proves the efficacy of this quote unquote treatment. And that's because the question has always been, it's not really a question, to normal people, to sane people, it's not a question, but just using the term loosely. The question has always been about the long-term effects of sterilizing and castrating somebody and trying to change their gender. The question is the long-term effect. How they feel about it a month later is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. How they feel about it a year later is irrelevant. 5 years later, even that is not really the question, although a lot of them a year later or 5 years later will regret it. The regret sets in very, very quickly for many of these people. But even that's not the question. The question is, what is their life going to be like 20 years from now? Especially if this is being done at 13 years old. If you've got a 13-year-old kid who was, quote unquote, transitioned, well, checking in with that 13-year-old when he's 15 isn't going to tell us much. He's still a kid. So, no, what I want to know is that 13-year-old kid, how is he doing when he's 35? When he's a full-grown man? How is the 35-year-old version of that 13-year-old kid feeling about the fact that he can't have kids ever, and he's stuck in this body that is still male and will never be female, but is sort of in this state of like permanent prepubescence? How does he feel about that as a 35-year-old man? How does a 13-year-old girl feel when she's 35? How does the 35-year-old version of that 13-year-old girl feel about not having breasts and not being able to ever bear children? What that means is that we are still like 10 years away from being able to do any kind of reliable follow-up with the, for lack of a better term, the first batch of kids who this stuff was done to en masse. We're a decade away from being able to even follow up in any kind of meaningful way. Which is why all along there were two options. One of them is, well, let's just do this to a whole bunch of kids and hope it works out and use them as lab rats and check back in 2 decades and see how their lives are working out. That's one option. That's the insane, mad scientist option, where you are using human beings as lab rats and performing human experiments. That's one option. The other option is to use your common sense and say, well, no, I don't need to check back. Like, I already know that it's not going to improve their lives or their well-being in the long run or even the short run to mutilate their bodies and interfere with its natural processes. So you can just use common sense. Your basic common sense will tell you that. Your basic human, basic human decency tells you that, or should anyway. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.